When a corrupt cop gets caught running a trafficking operation by a brave young boy, he thinks knocking the kid out will keep his dirty secret hidden. But he's dead wrong. Against all odds, the boy makes a full recovery, setting in motion a chain of events that will expose the officer's lies and betrayal. This is a story of resilience, survival, and the pursuit of justice no one saw coming. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you stand against corruption and for justice, be sure to like and subscribe for more. The evening air was cool and still, the sky painted in hues of amber and violet as the sun dipped below the horizon. 14-year-old Jake Carter trudged along the familiar path home, hands shoved deep in his hoodie pockets. The quiet walk was one of the few times he could think about his father without anyone watching. Officer Logan Carter, his hero, had been killed in the line of duty 3 months ago. The loss left a hollow ache in Jake's chest, one that no amount of time seemed to ease. What made it worse was the lack of closure. His father's death was still an unsolved mystery. As Jake neared the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, a flicker of motion caught his eye. He paused, narrowing his gaze at the dim light spilling through cracks in the building's worn exterior. It was strange. The warehouse had been empty for years. Curiosity prickled at him. Tugging his phone from his pocket, he crept closer, careful not to make a sound. Through a gap in the weathered planks, Jake's breath caught in his throat. Inside, the scene was something out of a nightmare. Rows of people sat bound and gagged, their faces pale with fear. Crates stacked high bore labels he didn't recognize, while armed men barked orders, their rifles slung casually over their shoulders. A gruff voice pierced the air. "Load up the rest. We're moving out at dawn. No mistakes." Jake's heart raced as he fumbled to switch on his phone's camera. He snapped a few shaky photos, his hands trembling with adrenaline. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he forced himself to stay long enough to record snippets of the men's conversation. "The boss doesn't want any loose ends," one of them muttered. "Then we'll make sure there aren't any," another replied with a chilling smirk. A loose board creaked beneath Jake's foot, and he froze. The men didn't appear to hear it, but the noise was enough to snap his nerve. Quietly backing away, Jake turned and bolted into the woods, his heart hammering against his ribs. Branches clawed at his arms as he ran, his mind in overdrive. He needed to find help. He needed someone to see the photos. After what felt like forever, he stumbled onto the main road and spotted a patrol car parked beneath a streetlight. Relief washed over him as he recognized the officer stepping out. Grant Barber, a well-regarded figure in the community. Jake had seen him at school assemblies, talking about safety and serving as a role model for kids. "Officer Grant," Jake called, waving frantically. "You have to help me." Grant's face creased with worry as Jake reached him, panting and clutching his phone. "Jake, what's going on?" "There's something at the warehouse. People tied up, drugs, guns." "I took photos," Jake said in a rush, thrusting his phone toward Grant. "You have to do something." Grant took the phone, his expression unreadable as he scrolled through the images. For a moment, Jake felt like he could finally breathe. But then Grant's demeanor changed. His jaw tightened, and a cold, calculating glint flashed in his eyes. "You've done the right thing, Jake," Grant said, his tone calm but hollow. "I'll handle it from here." Jake frowned, sensing something was wrong. "Wait, I can—" Before he could finish, pain exploded at the back of his head. The world spun as Jake crumpled to the ground, darkness swallowing him whole. When Jake stirred briefly, he was lying on damp earth. His vision wavered, but he caught glimpses of a man dragging him into a ditch. Gravel scraped his cheek as he was rolled onto his side. The man crouched beside him, muttering under his breath. "Should have kept your nose out of it, kid," he said, patting Jake's pockets until he found the phone. The man smashed it against a rock, the shattering glass echoing in the still night. Satisfied, he straightened, leaving Jake crumpled in the ditch, and disappeared into the distance. The next morning, the world stirred to life with the sound of birds chirping and joggers padding along their routes. A middle-aged man out for his daily run skidded to a halt when he spotted a figure lying motionless near the roadside. "Oh my goodness," he whispered, pulling out his phone to call 911. Paramedics arrived quickly, loading the unconscious boy onto a stretcher and rushing him to the hospital. Angela Carter was notified within the hour. When she arrived, her breath caught at the sight of her son. Pale and still, hooked up to machines that beeped rhythmically. "What happened to my boy?" she demanded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Who did this to him?" Grant was among the officers who responded to the scene, his face carefully schooled into concern. "We'll investigate every lead, Mrs. Carter," he said gravely. "It looks like a mugging. We'll find the person responsible." As Angela clung to her son's hand, willing him to wake up, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly amiss. The steady hum of hospital machines was the only sound filling the sterile room as Angela Carter sat by her son's bedside. She clutched Jake's hand, her knuckles white, as though her grip alone could pull him back from the edge. Her mind swirled with fear and anger. She had already lost her husband, Logan, in the line of duty. Now, the thought of losing Jake felt like a cruel twist of fate. The doctors assured Angela that Jake was stable but couldn't predict when, or if, he would regain consciousness. The uncertainty gnawed at her, but Angela knew one thing for certain. Someone had hurt her son, and she wasn't about to rest until she found out who. News of Jake's attack spread quickly through their small community. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers dropped off casseroles, cards, and flowers at the hospital. Angela appreciated their kindness, but it felt hollow. None of it could answer the burning questions in her mind. Who had done this, and why? At the center of the town's concern was Officer Grant Barber, a fixture in the community and a familiar face at local events. He arrived at the hospital the next morning, his uniform pressed and his manner solemn. Standing before reporters and townsfolk, he assured everyone that the police were working tirelessly to investigate the attack. This was likely an isolated incident, Grant said, his voice calm and steady. "A random mugging gone wrong. We'll do everything in our power to bring the perpetrator to justice." Angela watched the press conference from a chair near Jake's room, her heart clenching with each phrase. Grant's concern seemed genuine, but something about his tone felt too practiced, too measured. She tightened her fists, wondering if her rising unease was just her grief, or something more. Angela began piecing together what little she knew. Jake had left his friend's house just after sunset. He should have been home within 20 minutes, but hours had passed before he was found unconscious in that ditch. Where had he been during that gap of time? What had he seen? Determined to find answers, Angela visited the places Jake might have passed that night. The corner store clerk remembered seeing Jake, but nothing unusual. A jogger recalled a patrol car near the ditch, but couldn't provide more details. When Angela asked about the warehouse, people grew tight-lipped, their eyes shifting away. One older man whispered, "You don't want to go snooping around there, Mrs. Carter." "This bad news," Angela pressed him, but he shook his head and walked off, leaving her more frustrated than ever. Meanwhile, Grant maintained his polished image as the town's protector. He dropped by the hospital regularly, checking on Angela and Jake. To everyone else, his presence was comforting, but Angela couldn't ignore the discomfort roiling in her gut. He seemed too composed, too detached whenever he spoke about the investigation. Behind the scenes, Grant worked furiously to cover his tracks. The night after Jake's attack, he and his men emptied the warehouse, removing every trace of the trafficking operation. The captives were moved, and the contraband relocated to another state. By morning, the building was bare, its walls silent witnesses to what had happened. Grant also ensured no loose ends. He visited the jogger who had reported Jake, subtly reminding him just how risky it could be to talk too much. Meanwhile, he monitored Angela's movements, aware that her drive for answers could endanger everything if she found out the truth. When Angela returned to the hospital one evening, she found Grant sitting in the waiting room, chatting with a nurse. He greeted her with a warm smile that made her skin prickle. "How's Jake doing today?" he asked, his voice full of practiced sympathy. "Same as before," Angela replied curtly, not meeting his eyes. No change. Grant nodded. We're doing everything we can to find who did this. Promise. Angela longed to scream at him, to demand answers. But she held back. If there was even a grain of truth to her suspicions, confronting him outright would be dangerous. Instead, she poured her frustration into action. She returned to the warehouse, hoping to find some clue, anything, that might explain why Jake had been there. But when she arrived, it was unnervingly clean. The crates, the captives, the lights, all gone. The air was thick with the smell of bleach, as if someone had scrubbed away every hint of what had transpired. Her heart sank. Whoever was behind this knew how to hide their trail. Angela started confiding her fears to people in town. The responses were mixed. Some believed her, offering hushed support and sympathetic words. Others dismissed her concerns as the imaginings of a grieving mother. And then there were those who steered clear, their worried glances hinting that they knew more than they would ever say. Even the police seemed aloof. When Angela pressed Officer Daniels, Grant's Jr., about the warehouse, he shrugged uneasily. It's just an empty building, Mrs. Carter. We've checked it out. There's nothing there. Nothing there now, Angela snapped. But what about before? Daniels hesitated, glancing over his shoulder. I really don't know what you're talking about, he muttered, before hurrying off. That night, Angela sat by Jake's bedside, watching his pale face and the bandage wrapped around his head. Her mind replayed Grant's words, his cool manner, and the jogger's comment about seeing a patrol car. The puzzle pieces weren't aligning, but her instincts told her she was onto something. I'll find out what happened to you, Jake, she whispered, gently brushing his hair back. I'll find who did this. Jake's fingers twitched slightly in response, a faint spark of hope in an otherwise bleak moment. Angela took it as a sign, her determination strengthening. Do you think Grant was the one who killed Jake's father? Share your theories in the comments. Will Jake ever wake up, and will Officer Grant be brought to justice? Give this video a like and stay tuned to find out. The hospital corridors were quiet, the fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow on the empty halls. It was nearly midnight, and most of the staff had gone home or settled into their night shifts. Jake lay motionless in his bed, his chest rising and falling in a consistent rhythm, the machines beeping softly in the background. Angela sat in the corner of the room, her head resting against the back of the chair. The past week had taken a toll on her. Sleep arrived in fits and starts, and she often jolted awake, haunted by nightmares of losing Jake. Tonight, however, exhaustion finally overcame her, and her eyes slid shut. Two figures moved silently through the hospital's poorly lit parking lot, their faces concealed by hooded sweatshirts. They avoided the main entrance, slipping inside via a side door left ajar by an overworked staff member earlier in the evening. Within, their steps were purposeful, each man carrying the weight of an unspoken agenda. One of the men, stocky with a thick beard, glanced at the other. We do this neat. No noise, he whispered. His partner, lean and wiry, nodded, gripping the syringe tight in his gloved hand. They reached the elevator and waited, the hum of the mechanism the only sound in the hush. When the doors slid open, they stepped inside, their expressions hard. Angela stirred in her chair, a distant noise pulling her from the edges of sleep. She blinked, bleary-eyed, adjusting to the dim glow of the room. For a second, everything seemed normal. Jake was still, the machines hummed, and the hallway beyond was silent. But then she heard it again. A faint creak, as if someone were easing a door open very slowly. Her pulse sped up as she stood, eyes flicking toward the door. It was cracked open just enough, and a shadow danced across the floor. Angela's instincts took over, and she rushed to Jake's bedside, placing herself between him and the doorway. Her gaze swept the room, searching for anything she could use as a weapon. The door swung wide, and the two men stepped in. Their faces were partly hidden, but the intent in their eyes was obvious. Angela's voice shook as she yelled, "Who are you? What do you think you're doing?" The stocky man paused briefly before lunging at her. Angela screamed, stumbling backward in her scramble for the nurse's call button. Meanwhile, the wiry man advanced on Jake, raising the syringe. At that instant, the door flew open again. A nurse, alerted by Angela's shout, rushed in. The intruders froze, their plot unraveling in seconds. "Forget it," the stocky man cursed, grabbing his partner's arm. "We're done. Let's go." They fled the room, knocking over a tray of medical supplies in their haste. Angela gave chase, but the nurse clutched her arm. "Don't. They might be armed." By the time hospital security arrived, the men were gone, vanishing into the night as if they had never been there. Angela collapsed into a chair, shaking. Her eyes were on Jake, still unconscious, but unharmed. Tears poured down her face. "They were going to kill him," she whispered. The police arrived within the hour, headed by none other than Officer Grant Barber. He listened to Angela's account with a carefully practiced calm, nodding in all the correct places, yet giving away nothing more than professional concern. "This sounds like a misunderstanding," Grant said eventually. "Could have been junkies looking for drugs. The hospital isn't exactly a fortress." "A misunderstanding?" Angela shot back, her voice rising. "They had a syringe. They were trying to kill him." Grant raised his hands in a placating gesture. "We'll look into it, Mrs. Carter. I'll personally make sure this is investigated thoroughly." Angela's hands balled into fists. She didn't trust him, not for a moment, but had nowhere else to turn. That same night, too agitated to sleep, Angela phoned someone she hoped would listen, Mayor Robert Hamilton. He had been a friend of Logan's, always praising him at the funeral. She prayed he would pay attention. "Robert, it's Angela Carter," she began, her voice trembling. "Something happened tonight. Someone just tried to kill Jake in the hospital." "Angela, calm down," Hamilton said, tone grave. "What do you mean? Who'd do that?" "I don't know," Angela said, "but the police, Grant, he isn't taking it seriously. I'm telling you, something bigger is going on, and they're trying to hide it." A pause, then Hamilton spoke with resolve. "If what you're saying is true, we can't risk it. I'll contact the FBI. They'll make sure this is handled properly." Angela exhaled, relief flooding her. "Thank you, Robert. Thank you." Within 24 hours, Special Agent Hannah Price was assigned to the case. A seasoned investigator renowned for her relentless pursuit of justice, Price wasted no time taking command. "Mrs. Carter," she said, extending a handshake at the hospital, "I'm here to ensure your son is safe, and to figure out who's behind this." Angela felt the first flicker of optimism in days. "Thank you," she whispered, almost too overwhelmed to speak. "I've been so scared." Price nodded. "You have every right to be. My team is already on this. From now on, nobody gets in or out of this room without clearance." Although comforted by the FBI's involvement, Angela's paranoia continued to gnaw at her. Every silhouette in the hospital corridor loomed threatening. Every stranger who passed by felt like a possible enemy. Agent Price's team set up camp near Jake's door, their presence a faint solace but not enough to quell Angela's growing fear. Meanwhile, Price began fitting the puzzle pieces together. The attempted assault on Jake raised obvious questions about why he was targeted to begin with. "There's more to this than a random mugging," Price told her squad. "Someone wants this kid kept silent." That night, Angela remained alert at Jake's bedside, clutching his hand while she stood guard over him. She couldn't banish the memory of those intruders, their lifeless eyes, their purposeful strides. She wouldn't lose Jake, not after losing Logan. As midnight crept past, Angela whispered to her unconscious son, "You're going to be okay, Jake. I swear. They won't get near you again." Jake didn't stir, but Angela sensed the slightest squeeze of his fingers against hers. It was enough to shore up her hope, even amid the danger surrounding them. 2 weeks had gone by since Jake Carter was found unconscious in that ditch. The hospital room had turned into a second home for Angela, who rarely left her son's side. The steady beep of machinery was both comforting and ominous, reminding her daily of Jake's precarious condition. Each day that passed without progress wore on her nerves, but she refused to leave him. She had already lost her husband. She wouldn't lose her son. Then, on a still morning, The monotony broke with a flicker of life. Jake's fingers twitched. Angela initially believed she imagined it, but his eyelids fluttered soon after. She sprang out of her chair, grabbing his hand. "Jake!" she whispered, her voice trembling with possibility. "Jake, can you hear me?" Jake's eyes opened, clouded and heavy with exhaustion. "Mom," he croaked, voice faint but unmistakable. Tears of joy streamed down Angela's face as she leaned forward. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here." Relief surged through her, but the euphoria proved short-lived. Jake's brow furrowed, and a look of distress darkened his features. "It was Officer Grant," he said. Angela froze, her breath catching in her throat. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice shaking. "It was Grant," Jake repeated, speaking more firmly this time. "I tried to tell him about the warehouse, the people tied up, the guns. He hit me, took my phone, and threw me in a ditch." Angela's world spun. Officer Grant Barber, the man leading the investigation, the one she had depended upon, was the same man who'd harmed her son? "Are you sure, Jake?" she asked, though her heart already knew the answer. Jake nodded weakly. "He's involved, Mom. He's with them." By the time Agent Hannah Price arrived, Jake had recounted the entire ordeal. Price listened carefully, her piercing gaze taking in every detail. "Jake, what you've told us is invaluable," Price said, her voice level. "But we have to be extremely cautious. If Grant learns you're awake and talking, he might try again." Angela's grasp on Jake's hand tightened. "You can't let that happen. You promised to protect him." "I will," Price assured her. "My agents are here around the clock. No one gets in or out without our approval. But we also have to keep Jake's statement secret while we build our case." Angela hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, just keep him safe." As Jake recovered, his memories returned bit by bit. One evening, with machines humming around them, he turned to his mother. "Mom, do you remember how Dad was acting before he died?" Angela's heart seized at the mention of Logan. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Jake frowned, clearly wrestling with how to phrase it. "He was different. Quiet, like something was bothering him. Do you think it had anything to do with Grant?" Angela's stomach churned. She'd forced herself not to dwell on Logan's death or the unresolved questions. But now it all began to click into place. "I'm not sure, Jake," she admitted, voice trembling. "But we're going to find out." While Jake rested, Price delved into Logan Carter's final cases. What she discovered was alarming. A trail of arrests that were discreetly dismissed, all from Grant's precinct. One name emerged repeatedly: Logan Carter. Price dug deeper, finding a file Logan had been compiling off the books shortly before his death. It wasn't part of any official investigation, but it hinted at something massive, a trafficking ring in the area. Angela sat beside Jake, her hand resting gently on his, her mind racing as she mulled over everything Price had uncovered. If Logan had been getting close to Grant, his demise wasn't just a tragedy. It was murder. "Mom," Jake's voice shattered her reverie. He gazed at her, anxiety clouding his expression. "I'm scared. What if they come back?" Angela leaned over, pressing a comforting kiss to his forehead. "They won't," she promised, her voice fierce. "I won't let anyone hurt you. Never again." Jake's lips quivered, but he nodded. "Okay." Grant's visits to the hospital diminished in frequency, but when he did appear, his demeanor was tense. Angela took note, her suspicions intensifying with each passing meeting. She couldn't avoid noticing how his eyes roamed the room, how his smile felt forced. Jake, still weak though regaining strength, had overheard Angela mention Grant's name to Price. Despite the urge to confront the man who'd struck him, Jake listened to Price's counsel and kept up the charade of unconsciousness. If Grant realized Jake was awake, he might act sooner than the FBI was ready. When Grant walked in, Jake would keep his eyes shut and his breath even, as if still in a coma. It demanded every bit of willpower not to leap up and shout the truth. Each time Grant's voice echoed around him, Jake's skin crawled. But he remembered Price's warning. If he knows you're awake, you won't be safe. One evening, after Grant left, Angela found Price in the corridor. "Do you think he's suspicious?" Angela murmured, her tone hushed. Price's face was grim. "Possibly. But Jake is doing the smart thing by pretending. Grant won't act unless he's cornered. When we move, we'll make it airtight." Inside the room, Jake slitted open his eyes just enough to see the door Grant had walked through. His heart pounded, but he stayed silent, determined to do his part in bringing Grant down. The shift in the investigation came suddenly once Agent Hannah Price formally took command. The FBI immediately set up a temporary field office where agents pored over evidence, gathered leads, and planned their next steps. The atmosphere was electric, a sharp break from the stalled response of the local police. As the FBI ramped up its surveillance of Officer Grant Barber, the scope of his corruption emerged. Phone logs tied him to known traffickers, bank statements displayed suspicious transactions, and newly obtained footage showed him in meetings with the Ring's members. Grant wasn't just complicit. He was central to the entire operation. Price's second-in-command, Agent Daniels, approached her with a bulky folder. "We've got it all. Illicit payments to shell businesses, calls with the traffickers, even footage of him near that first warehouse before they cleared out." Price skimmed the documents, her expression hardening. "He's been playing both sides for years. Let's ensure he gets no warning." While digging deeper, the FBI uncovered a horrifying link between Grant and the death of Logan Carter. Price's squad discovered that Logan had been quietly investigating the traffickers before his murder. His personal notes, gleaned from old records, zeroed in on Grant's role in the racket. One line stood out: "Grant knows I'm on to him. He's worried. I'm getting too close." Price shared this finding with Angela during a hushed moment at the hospital. "Your husband didn't just die in the line of duty," she said gently. "He was eliminated." Angela went pale, gripping the chair arms. "Logan always said he was onto something big. He never told me details. He claimed it was safer if I didn't know." Price nodded. "He was a courageous man. He got close to unmasking Grant, and they made sure he couldn't do it." Using Jake's recollections and the FBI's data on Grant, the team identified the group's new base of operations, a larger facility in a neighboring city. "This is it," Price declared in a briefing. "We've confirmed Grant's made numerous trips here. We strike now and shut them down." The plan was direct, yet perilous. A coordinated raid to cripple the Ring, rescue the captives, and arrest every person involved, Grant included. The tactical teams prepped long into the night, rehearsing entry methods and examining warehouse diagrams. Price underscored the mission's urgency. "No slip-ups," she warned. "If they catch the slightest hint, they'll vanish." Meanwhile, Angela stayed with Jake in a secure location arranged by the FBI. Although relieved to be out of immediate harm's way, the distance from the operation weighed on her. Jake passed the evening restlessly, sketching every detail he could recall about the warehouse. "You're doing great," Angela soothed, brushing a hand through his hair. "Your dad would be so proud." Jake nodded, jaw set with resolve. "They've got to stop him, Mom. For Dad." "They will," Angela promised, her voice unwavering despite her internal fear. "They will." The darkness was thick with suspense as the FBI squad converged on the warehouse, finishing their last-minute preparations for the dawn raid. Agent Hannah Price stood at the front, giving the final rundown. "This is a high-stakes operation. We've confirmed hostages inside. There are illegal goods and potentially violent suspects. Our top priority: the captive's safety and collecting evidence to prosecute everyone involved." As the team departed in unmarked vans, Price checked her watch. Surprise was the key element. Failure wasn't an option. The warehouse emerged on the horizon, a looming shape against the faint glow of sunrise. Tactical agents took position, their boots quiet on the gravel. Price gave the go-ahead, and within seconds the perimeter was breached. The banging of doors echoed in the hush, accompanied by shouts of "FBI!" "Down on the floor!" Inside, chaos erupted as the criminals scrambled, some snatching weapons, others diving for cover. The agents pressed in, systematically securing each corner of the warehouse. Terrified captives huddled in corners, ropes binding their wrists, fear etched on their features. Price made sure they were quickly freed, instructing her agents, "Get them out." Medics are waiting. As the rescued captives were escorted outdoors, one girl, barely 10, clung to an agent's sleeve, sobbing as she described what she had endured. "They were going to sell us," she whimpered. "They said we'd disappear." Price crouched beside her, voice soothing yet firm. "You're safe now. Nobody's going to harm you again." In one section of the warehouse, agents found boxes of drugs, firearms, and stacks of currency. Among the hoard were damning records, logs of transactions, shipping routes, and cryptic codes. Price's agents meticulously photographed and seized everything. "This is enough to bury them," Agent Daniels announced, flipping through a ledger. But just then, a voice crackled through their radios. "We've got movement. Barber heading south." Price's stomach sank. "Lock down the exits," she commanded, but it was no use. Grant, well aware of the building's layout, slipped out a side entrance during the commotion. Outside, tire tracks on the dirt road told the story. Grant had taken off in a parked vehicle. When the raid concluded, the captives were ushered into ambulances for treatment, and the criminals were loaded into police vans. The young girl who had spoken to Price earlier gave a thorough statement. "I saw him," she insisted, still shaking. "The man you're after, he gave the orders. He said no one would ever find us." Her words, combined with Jake's claims and the trove of evidence from the raid, further reinforced the case against Grant and his associates. But Price remained unsettled that he'd escaped. Back at the field office, Price relayed the debrief. "We've destroyed their major hub, but this isn't over. Grant's desperate now, and we can't let him vanish." She turned to Agent Daniels. "Double the watch on any known contacts. He's cornered, and cornered men make mistakes." The walls were tightening around Officer Grant Barber. With the FBI dismantling his operation and his partners either jailed or on the run, Grant knew his time was almost up. But he refused to go quietly. Driven by desperation, he made one final, reckless gamble. Grant's battered truck rumbled along a lonely dirt road, heading toward a secluded cabin deep in the woods. Beside him sat a trembling young girl, her hands bound. She was one of the captives saved from the warehouse, someone Grant had intended to profit from prior to the FBI's intervention. Now she was his bargaining chip. "Stay quiet," he snarled, darting her a look. "They don't care about you, but they'll do whatever it takes to stop me." Grant's plan was grim but simple. Use the girl to buy time. He had stashed emergency cash and forged IDs, planning to flee the state. He just needed room to maneuver, time the FBI was unlikely to give freely. Back at the FBI field office, Agent Hannah Price pored over newly intercepted communications and updated surveillance. "He's panicking," she told the squad. "Panicked individuals act rashly, but they're also lethal." Her phone buzzed. An agent's voice crackled. "We've traced Grant's vehicle to a cabin in Pinewood Forest. Satellite confirms it's remote. No reinforcements close by." Price's jaw tightened. "Any sign of hostages?" "There's a heat signature consistent with multiple people," the agent confirmed. "We suspect he's holding someone." Price felt a wave of dread but forced a calm. "We move swiftly and carefully. No margin for error." The FBI's tactical crew arrived at the cabin under cover of darkness. Price stood at the front, her earpiece alive with quiet chatter from her team. Only one small lamp shone from the cabin window. Price shouted, voice clear, "Grant Barber, this is the FBI. We know you're in there. Let the girl go, and we can discuss this." Inside, Grant prowled like a caged wolf, gun in hand. The little girl cowered on a threadbare sofa, tears glinting on her cheeks. Grant yelled back, "You don't control anything, Price. You come near this door, and she's done for." Price held her position, tone firm. "Hurting her won't help you, Grant. We both know how this ends. Let her go, and we'll listen to you." Grant hesitated, tightening his grip on the gun. "You fools. You've got no idea what you're dealing with." As the standoff dragged on, Grant's temper worsened. He moved closer to the doorway, barking commands, which was all the FBI needed. Agents quietly slipped in from the rear, working with silent precision. Grant spotted them too late. "No," he roared, swinging his gun upward. But a flashbang detonated, flooding his vision with blinding light and deafening noise. The girl shrieked as the agents stormed in, whisking her to safety. Grant fought viciously, flailing at the agents, but he was no match for their training. Within seconds, he was pinned to the floor, handcuffs ratcheting around his wrists. Outside, the young girl was wrapped in a blanket, her tears muffled against Price's shoulder. "You're okay now," Price murmured. "No one will hurt you again." Dragged out of the cabin, Grant glared with unbridled hatred. "You think this changes anything?" he spat at Price. "You can't stop it. Someone else always steps in." Price met his stare, cold and unwavering. "Not tonight." The interrogation room was hushed, except for the unsteady tapping of Grant Barber's fingers on the metal table. Despite being in custody, his demeanor was arrogant. He lounged in his chair, arms crossed, as if the FBI agents facing him were squandering his time. "You've got nothing," he sneered at Agent Hannah Price, who stood across from him with her arms folded and her face emotionless. "Cuffing me doesn't change a damn thing. This is bigger than you." Price refused to be baited. She plopped a fat file onto the table, spilling out photos, ledgers, and testimonies. "You're correct, Grant. It is bigger than me. But it isn't bigger than this." Grant's cocky grin wavered as Price leaned in. "We have witnesses, your financial records, the ledgers from the ring, and survivors who'll testify." The evidence was overwhelming. The survivors rescued from those warehouses recounted horrific tales, confirming Grant's hands-on role. Among them was the girl Grant had taken hostage at the cabin. Her voice, though shaky, was crystal clear. He gave orders, decided who stayed and who got moved. He said no one would ever find us. The paperwork seized from the second warehouse sealed Grant's fate. His name was listed in every ledger and transaction. He was the nerve center of the trafficking network. Grant's confidence began to falter as Agent Hannah Price leaned closer. Her tone was eerily calm but laced with fury. "We know Logan Carter was on to you, Grant. You didn't just kill a cop that day, you murdered a man who respected you. A man who embodied everything you betrayed." Grant's lips thinned, cracks showing in his facade. For the first time, his eyes shifted to the one-way mirror, likely guessing who might be watching. He squirmed in his seat but kept silent. Price persisted, her voice turning sharper. "Logan kept notes, Grant. Even if you tried to cover your tracks, he documented your actions, your ties to this ring. He was building a case, and you knew it. That's why you silenced him." Grant snapped, smashing his fist against the table. "You know nothing," he bellowed, the sound echoing in the featureless room. Price didn't flinch. She leaned back, letting the tension stretch. "So what actually happened?" she pressed. "He got too close, so you got rid of him?" Grant's breathing turned ragged, and a flash of rage crossed his face. "Logan wouldn't stop," he hissed. "I warned him, told him to let it lie, but he couldn't just back off. Always had to be a hero." Price's pen froze in mid-note. She locked eyes with Grant. "So you killed him?" Grant's jaw clenched, but the truth spilled forth anyway. "He would have ruined it all. The scheme, the money, the power I'd earned. He wouldn't step aside, so I handled it." Beyond the mirror, Angela Carter covered her mouth, tears coursing down her cheeks. Her husband hadn't simply been killed on duty. He'd been betrayed by someone he once trusted. Price hammered the point home. "Did you ambush him? Make it look like he died in the line of duty?" Grant's face contorted with a bitter sneer. "Not that it matters now, does it? He's gone. For what? A wife and kid who couldn't save him?" Price stood abruptly, eyes flashing with suppressed anger. "You're right. Logan couldn't save himself. But his wife and son, they're going to ensure you spend the rest of your life behind bars." She strode out, leaving Grant alone, his bravado shredded by the reality he'd been forced to admit. As the FBI advanced its investigation, the aftermath of Grant's capture rippled through the underworld. High-ranking officials tied to the ring, emboldened by Grant's shield in law enforcement, now found themselves exposed. Using the ledgers and statements from survivors, the FBI carried out synchronized raids in multiple states. These aren't just foot soldiers, Agent Daniels told Price during a meeting. We're talking attorneys, executives, maybe even lawmakers. Grant was only part of the puzzle. One by one, the syndicate's leaders were hauled in. Warehouses shuttered, assets frozen, safe houses uncovered. Each arrest brought the criminals closer to a complete collapse. Price knew the war wasn't fully won. There's always another player, she said grimly. But we've gutted their core. With Grant behind bars and the ring dismantled, the next major step was the trial. Jake, still healing, prepared to testify. Although only 14, he showed a fortitude that impressed even Price. He must be held accountable for what he's done, Jake declared in a meeting with the FBI's legal counsel. Not just for me, but for my dad and everyone else. Angela stood beside him, her sorrow overshadowed by her determination. Jake is stronger than people realize, she said softly. He'll speak, and the jury will listen. During the quiet interludes, Angela and Jake reflected on Logan's ideals. They visited his grave to lay flowers and share memories. He never gave up, Angela murmured one afternoon, her voice subdued. Even when it cost him dearly, Jake stared at the headstone. He did the right thing. Now we have to finish it. Angela gently touched Jake's shoulder, her chest swelling with pride. We will, Jake. Together. The courtroom was packed, the weight of expectations suffocating everyone. Cameras flashed outside, reporters buzzed inside, and tension ran high. Once revered Officer Grant Barber sat at the defense table in shackles, his expression a mask of mounting anxiety. He adjusted his tie, scanning the crowd with restless eyes, straining to keep control. He paled when the door swung open and Jake Carter entered, wearing a neatly pressed suit that seemed too big for him. Jake walked in accompanied by Angela, head held high. Grant's composure cracked for just a moment. The boy he believed would never wake had risen to seal his fate. Jake took his seat on the witness stand, meeting Grant's gaze. He might have been frightened, but his eyes shone with determination. This was his moment, a chance to make Grant pay. The prosecutor approached, voice calm but serious. Jake, please tell the court what happened the night you were attacked. Jake glimpsed his mother, who nodded encouragingly. He drew a long breath and began. I was walking home when I saw something going on in that abandoned warehouse. I looked inside and saw captives and guys with guns. I took pictures on my phone and ran to get help. He paused, voice still steady despite the weight of the memory. I saw Officer Grant's patrol car and thought he'd help me. I told him everything, showed him the photos. But instead, he knocked me out. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Jake continued, resolute. I woke up in a ditch. He left me there to die. Grant's attorney erupted in objection, but the judge silenced him. Let the boy speak, she declared, tone firm. Jake recounted the events leading up to his flight from the warehouse, describing the cruelty of the men in charge and how Grant had betrayed him. He wasn't just part of it, Jake insisted, voice charged with emotion. He was running it. He called the shots. Jake's words, backed by the avalanche of evidence the FBI gathered, dealt a devastating blow to Grant's defense. News outlets devoured the unfolding story. More victims came forward, unveiling a web of wrongdoing that extended far beyond Havenport. Agent Price provided expert testimony about the ring and Grant's central role. This operation required an insider, she stated. Grant Barber was that insider. It took the jury only a handful of hours to deliberate. The courtroom fell into an expectant hush as the judge read the final judgment. On the counts of conspiracy, corruption, trafficking, and the murder of Officer Logan Carter, this court finds the defendant, Grant Barber, guilty on all charges. Angela squeezed Jake's hand as relief and grief swept through her. Justice was served, but the price was unimaginable. Sentencing came quickly. The judge's voice was firm as she addressed Grant. Your abuse of the badge entrusted to you by the community is horrific. You used your authority to harm the very people you were sworn to protect. This court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Grant was led away, he shot one final venomous look at Angela and Jake, a mix of rage and resignation on his face. Jake refused to avert his eyes, meeting Grant's malevolence with unwavering resolve. Outside, Angela and Jake were greeted by a throng of supporters and reporters. Flashes popped, microphones were thrust forward. Angela lifted a hand to quiet them. "We're not here for publicity," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "We're here because justice matters. My husband gave his life for what's right, and my son risked his own life for the same cause. We honor their courage today." They stepped away only to be joined by Agent Price. She regarded Jake with a proud smile. "You did so well in there. Your testimony changed everything." Jake looked down, modest. "I only told the truth." Price placed a hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes, that's the most courageous thing of all." On a crisp Sunday afternoon, Angela and Jake opted to visit the local park. It was one of those perfect spring days, the kind that Logan would have adored. The sky shone brilliantly, and the breeze carried a hint of blossoming flowers. They meandered along the winding footpaths, Jake idly kicking small stones, deep in thought. Angela ambled beside him, patient and ready to listen. Eventually, Jake broke the silence. "Mom," he said quietly, "do you think Dad realized how much we loved him?" Angela stopped, turning so they were eye to eye. "Oh, Jake," she said softly, resting a hand on his cheek. "He knew every day. That was what kept him going. He wanted a better world for us." Jake nodded, blinking away tears. "I miss him." "So do I," Angela whispered, pulling him into a close hug. "But I see him in you, his goodness, his bravery, his heart. He'd be so proud of who you've become." As the sun dropped, setting the park aglow with amber light, they found a bench where they could watch children laugh on the swings and slides. Their carefree giggles were a reminder of the innocence worth fighting for. "Will life ever be normal?" Jake asked softly, eyes on the distant horizon. Angela inhaled, weighing her answer. "I think our normal has changed," she said. "But that doesn't mean we can't find happiness again. Moving forward doesn't mean forgetting your dad. It means honoring him by living our lives." Jake offered a faint grin. "I think I understand." They stood, setting off on the path home. Jake turned to his mother, a thoughtful look on his face. "Dad would be proud, right?" Angela draped an arm around his shoulders as they walked. "He'd be proud of both of us," she said firmly, her voice tinged with fondness. The Carter family was no longer the same, but they had emerged stronger from the battles they had fought. Angela and Jake moved forward, keeping Logan's memory alive in their hearts as they forged a new beginning. As they strolled toward the light of their home, the sun setting behind them, the future felt a bit more hopeful. And for the first time in a long while, they sensed true peace. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, give this video a like. If you haven't already, subscribe for more. When a young boy endures hidden abuse and neglect at the hands of his foster parents, they believe their cruelty will remain buried beneath their carefully crafted facade. But they're dead wrong. A determined teacher steps in, exposing their lies and deception. This is a story of resilience, courage, and the relentless pursuit of justice for a child who refuses to be silenced. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you stand for justice, be sure to like and subscribe for more. Ethan's pencil froze mid-doodle as the classroom door creaked open. All heads turned. Miss Hayes, the principal, stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Ethan's stomach tightened. She rarely showed up unannounced, and when she did, it was never good news. "Ethan, I need to see you," she said, her voice calm but clipped. The room went silent. The other kids exchanged glances, a few smirks spreading across faces. Ethan's heart raced as he slid his notebook into his backpack. He avoided the stairs and shuffled past his classmates, each step feeling heavier than the last. His mind raced through everything he could have done wrong. Was it the forgotten homework? Did someone complain about him? Miss Hayes didn't say much as they walked down the hallway, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. each step echoing in the otherwise empty corridor. Ethan trailed behind, his palms damp. The principal's office door loomed ahead, its frosted glass catching the afternoon light. When Miss Hayes opened the door, Ethan hesitated on the threshold. His foster parents, Carl and Linda Miller, were sitting stiffly inside. Carl's hands rested on his knees, his jaw tight. Linda clutched her purse with both hands, her lips pressed into a strange smile. Ethan's pulse quickened. They never came to school. Why were they here? "Come in, Ethan," Miss Hayes said, motioning toward the empty chair beside Carl and Linda. He sat down slowly, his legs barely reaching the floor. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. Miss Hayes closed the door and took her seat behind the desk, folding her hands neatly. She looked at Ethan with a practiced warmth, but there was something else in her gaze. Concern, maybe even suspicion. "Ethan, I wanted to speak with you because one of your teachers, Miss Roberts, has expressed some concerns about you." Ethan's chest tightened. Concerns? What kind of concerns? His eyes flicked to Carl, who was staring straight ahead, his expression carved in stone. Linda's fake smile remained, but her knuckles had gone white from gripping her purse. Ethan couldn't bring himself to meet Miss Hayes's gaze. She mentioned a few things. Some bruises, your withdrawn behavior. She's worried that you might be having a hard time at home. "Is there anything you'd like to tell me?" Miss Hayes's tone was soft, inviting, too inviting. Ethan's throat felt like sandpaper. He opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Carl shifted in his chair, and Ethan caught the slight narrowing of his eyes, a warning. Linda reached out and rested a hand on Carl's arm. A small gesture, but one that screamed, "Stay in line." "I'm fine," Ethan finally croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. Miss Hayes tilted her head slightly, as if to encourage him. "Ethan, it's okay. If there's something wrong, you can tell me. We just want to make sure you're safe." Carl cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Miss Hayes, I understand your concern, but Ethan's been through a lot. Adjusting to a new home is always difficult, and we're doing everything we can to support him." Linda nodded quickly, her tone syrupy sweet. "Oh yes, Ethan's a wonderful boy, but he's still learning to trust us. These transitions can take time, can't they, sweetheart?" She turned to Ethan, her smile tightening. The word sweetheart felt like a knife in his chest. Ethan forced himself to nod, his hands clenched into fists in his lap. He didn't dare say otherwise. Miss Hayes glanced between them, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Ethan, do you feel safe at home?" Carl's jaw twitched. Ethan felt his gaze burn into the side of his face. He stared at the floor, his voice small. "Yes." The room fell silent. Miss Hayes leaned back in her chair, watching them closely. Finally, she exhaled and said, "All right. But Ethan, I want you to know that if you ever need to talk, my door is always open. Don't hesitate, okay?" Ethan nodded again, but the lump in his throat made it impossible to speak. As they left the office, Carl placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, his grip firm. He leaned down, his voice low and cold. "We'll talk about this later," he muttered, his fingers digging into Ethan's shoulder like claws. That night, Ethan sat in his room, staring at the crack under his door where light spilled in from the hallway. He could hear Carl and Linda's voices drifting up from the kitchen, their argument loud and bitter. "You're spending too much, Carl. We're barely making ends meet," Linda snapped. "Oh, don't start with that again," Carl shot back, his voice dripping with irritation. "We're fine as long as we've got the boy. The stipends will keep coming." "What's your problem?" "It's not about the money," Linda hissed. "It's about him. He's going to cause us trouble if we're not careful." "Did you see the way that principal was looking at us?" Carl let out a sharp laugh. "Let them look. No one's going to believe some foster kid over us. We're the perfect family, remember?" Ethan's hands trembled as he clutched the photo of his biological family he kept hidden under his mattress. It was faded, the edges torn, but it was the only thing he had left of his real home. He stared at his mother's smiling face, at the strong hand of his father holding him as a baby. "I miss you," he whispered, tears stinging his eyes. He let himself wonder, was staying silent really the safest choice? The bell rang, marking the start of a new school day, but Miss Roberts couldn't shake the unease from the day before. The brief meeting in the principal's office lingered in her mind, the tension in Ethan's shoulders, the way his foster parents had expertly deflected every concern. It hadn't sat right with her then, and it still didn't now. Ethan arrived late to class that morning, quietly slipping into his seat in the back. His hair was unkempt, and his shirt looked slightly wrinkled, as though he'd thrown it on in a rush. Miss Roberts noticed the dark circles under his eyes. He didn't look up as she began the lesson. "All right, let's pick up where we left off yesterday," she said, walking around the room as the students worked. Miss Roberts glanced at Ethan. His pencil moved slowly across the paper, his gaze fixed downward. Something was off. She could feel it. When the students were dismissed for recess, Miss Roberts called Ethan over. "Hey, Ethan, can you stay back for a minute? I need to talk to you." He hesitated, then nodded and shuffled to her desk, standing awkwardly, fidgeting with the strap of his backpack. "How are you doing today?" she asked, her tone light but genuine. Fine," he said quickly, too quickly. Miss Roberts folded her hands on the desk, softening her voice. "Ethan, if there's anything bothering you, you know you can talk to me, right? I'm here to help." He nodded again, but his silence spoke volumes. His eyes darted toward the door, as if calculating how quickly he could leave. Miss Roberts decided not to push him further. "All right, you can head to recess," she said, offering a small smile. "But remember, my door is always open." "Thanks," he mumbled, hurrying out of the room. That afternoon, Miss Roberts sat in the teacher lounge during lunch, her notebook open in front of her. She had started jotting down observations about Ethan, piecing together the small details that had unsettled her. She listed the things she had noticed over the past few months: his reluctance to participate in class activities, his habit of sitting alone during group work, and the worn-out clothes he often wore. Then there were the times he had come to school late or seemed exhausted, and the troubling comment he had made once about his parents not liking to waste money on food. "Ethan's been on your mind a lot lately, hasn't he?" asked Mrs. Alvarez, a colleague who taught math, as she sipped her coffee. Miss Roberts hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I feel like something's not right. Have you noticed anything?" Mrs. Alvarez leaned back in her chair, thinking. "He's always so quiet in my class. Doesn't really speak up unless I call on him. I've noticed he looks a little tired sometimes, but I figured it was just normal middle school stuff." "What about breakfast?" Miss Roberts pressed. "Has he ever come to your first period class hungry?" Mrs. Alvarez frowned. "Now that you mention it, yes, there have been a few mornings when he seemed out of it. He doesn't eat breakfast in the cafeteria either. He just sits there during free period." Miss Roberts made a note in her notebook, her gut telling her she was on the right track. "Thanks, Mrs. Alvarez. That helps." As the lunch period ended, Miss Roberts resolved to keep a closer eye on Ethan, but she knew she'd need more than just observations to take action. At dismissal that day, Miss Roberts stayed near the front entrance, watching the students leave. She spotted Ethan standing near the gate, his backpack slung low over one shoulder, his posture slouched, his gaze fixed on the ground. A moment later, a sleek black sedan pulled up, and Carl stepped out, dressed sharply in a button-down shirt and slacks, his polished shoes catching the light. "Hey there, champ," Carl called out, his voice warm and cheerful. Ethan flinched slightly but walked over to the car without a word. Miss Roberts noticed how he kept his head down, avoiding Carl's gaze. As Carl placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, something about the gesture seemed off. Too firm, too controlling. Miss Roberts's eyes narrowed. Carl's demeanor felt overly rehearsed, as though he was performing for anyone who might be watching. Ethan climbed into the passenger seat, and Carl gave a quick glance around before getting in himself. The car pulled away, leaving Miss Roberts standing there, her unease growing. That evening, back in her quiet apartment, Miss Roberts sat at her desk with her notebook open again. She wrote down everything she had seen that day: Ethan's late arrival, his withdrawn behavior, and the interaction with Carl at dismissal. Her pen hovered for a moment before she wrote. Ethan avoided looking at Carl. Tense body language. Carl's tone felt performative. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the notes. It was a lot of small pieces, but together they painted a troubling picture. She thought about going straight to the school counselor with what she had, but she knew that without concrete evidence, Carl and Linda would likely talk their way out of it again. Their charm and polished facade were hard to break through. Her thoughts wandered to Ethan, and a pang of guilt hit her. If she waited too long to act, what might happen to him? But if she acted without enough proof, would anyone believe her? Or worse, would it make things harder for him? Miss Roberts sighed and closed the notebook, her resolve firming. Tomorrow she would start paying even closer attention. She couldn't let this go unnoticed any longer. Do you think Ethan should speak out about his foster parents' neglect and abuse? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Will anyone believe him? Or will Carl and Linda's lies keep the truth buried? Don't forget to like this video if you're eager to find out, and stay tuned to see if Miss Roberts can uncover the truth before it's too late. Ethan sat at his usual spot near the corner of the room, away from the commotion, nibbling on a plain sandwich he'd hastily packed that morning. The cafeteria was buzzing with the usual midday chaos. Students laughing, trays clattering, conversations overlapping into a dull roar. His math homework lay open beside him, the pencil resting lightly in his hand. He wasn't really working on it, though. He was just trying to look busy. Mind if I sit here? The voice startled him. Ethan glanced up to see a boy around his age, standing across the table. He had an easy smile and a sharpness in his eyes that gave off a mix of confidence and mischief. Ethan shrugged, lowering his gaze back to his homework. Sure. The boy plopped his tray onto the table, sitting down with an exaggerated sigh. Man, this school is wild. I've only been here 2 days, and I've already seen 3 fights and 1 kid fall asleep during gym. You guys don't mess around, huh? Ethan didn't respond, unsure of what to say. I'm Noah, by the way, the boy continued, unfazed by Ethan's silence. He took a bite of his pizza and gestured toward Ethan's homework. You're working on math during lunch? You're making the rest of us look bad, man. Ethan finally allowed a small smile to creep onto his face, though he didn't look up. It's due next period. Fair enough, Noah said, leaning back in his chair. So, you always sit alone? Or am I just interrupting why time? Ethan hesitated, then shrugged. I just like the quiet. Noah nodded thoughtfully, as if filing that piece of information away. Cool. Quiet's good. He paused for a moment before adding, I'm new here, so I'm still figuring out who's who. You seem chill, though. Mind if I eat lunch here again tomorrow? Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the question. Most people didn't ask. They either ignored him completely or made him the butt of some joke. Sure, he mumbled. Sweet, Noah said, grinning. Looks like I found my lunch buddy. Over the next few days, Noah stuck to his word, showing up at Ethan's table every lunch period, chatting away about everything and nothing. Ethan didn't say much, but Noah didn't seem to mind. He filled the silences with stories about his old school, his favorite movies, and his general dislike for cafeteria food. One day during gym class, they were paired together for a basketball drill. Ethan moved clumsily on the court, clearly uncomfortable, while Noah bounced the ball effortlessly between his hands. At one point, Noah reached out to pass the ball to Ethan, and his gaze landed on Ethan's wrist. Hey, Noah said, frowning. What happened there? Ethan glanced down, realizing too late that his sleeve had ridden up, exposing a faint purple bruise just above his wrist. He quickly tugged the fabric down, shaking his head. Nothing. I just banged it on something. Noah raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical. Aha. Sure it's nothing. It is, Ethan insisted, turning away and grabbing the ball. Noah didn't press further, but his curiosity was piqued. He'd seen that look before, the quick deflection, the unwillingness to talk about it. It reminded him of kids he'd known in his previous foster homes. Kids who carried secrets they were too scared to share. Later that afternoon, the two of them walked home together, the sun low in the sky, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Noah tossed his backpack over one shoulder, keeping pace with Ethan. So, you're not really a talker, huh? Noah said after a while. Ethan shrugged. I just don't have much to say. Noah smirked. That's cool. I talk enough for both of us anyway. They walked in silence for a few minutes before Noah spoke again, his tone more serious. You know, I used to be in foster care, too. Ethan glanced at him, surprised. Yeah, Noah said, kicking a loose pebble down the sidewalk. I've had my share of bad homes. Not all of them, but a couple. There was this one family. They were all smiles in public. But behind closed doors, total nightmare. Ethan kept his eyes forward, but his grip on his backpack straps tightened. I didn't think anyone would believe me, Noah continued. I mean, who's gonna listen to some foster kid, right? That's what I told myself. But then one of my teachers noticed something was up, kind of like your Miss Roberts. She talked to me and I finally told her everything. Scared the hell out of me, but it was the best thing I ever did. Ethan didn't respond, but Noah could tell he was listening. Look, I'm not saying your situation is the same, Noah added quickly. I'm just saying there are people who care. Teachers, social workers, friends. You don't have to keep everything to yourself, you know? Ethan's jaw clenched, and he shook his head. You don't get it. Carl and Linda. They're good at making people believe what they want them to believe. No one's going to take my side. I do get it, Noah said. I've been there. But you're not alone in this. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. Okay? And if you ever want to tell Miss Roberts or someone else, I'll back you up. Ethan hesitated, fear and doubt warring inside him. The idea of speaking up still terrified him. For now, he said quietly, I'm not ready. Noah nodded. That's okay. I'll be here when you are. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan felt a small glimmer of hope flicker inside him. That evening, Ethan sat on his bed, replaying Noah's words in his head. He reached for the photo of his biological family under his pillow, running his fingers over the worn edges. Maybe Noah was right. Maybe there were people who cared. But the idea of speaking up still terrified him. For now, he decided he'd take it one day at a time. At least he had someone in his corner. The dinner table was quiet that evening, apart from the soft clinking of silverware against plates. Ethan sat in his usual spot, keeping his head down, cautiously eating the overcooked chicken Linda had made. Carl sat at the head of the table, scrolling through his phone, barely paying attention to anyone. Linda was fussing over the state of the house, muttering to herself about needing to clean up after dinner. Ethan, when you're done eating, I want you to clear the table and wipe down the counters, Linda said curtly, her tone sharp and businesslike. Yes, ma'am, Ethan replied quietly, barely lifting his head. As soon as the plates were cleared, Linda and Carl moved to the living room, leaving Ethan alone in the kitchen. He carefully stacked the dishes in the sink, taking extra care not to make a sound. His hands moved with practiced precision, scrubbing and rinsing, while his mind wandered to Noah's words from earlier that day. There are people who care. You don't have to keep everything to yourself. The thought felt distant, almost impossible. He reached for the cloth to wipe down the counter, but his elbow accidentally bumped into a small vase perched precariously on the edge. The sound of shattering ceramic filled the room. Ethan froze, his stomach dropping as he stared at the broken pieces scattered on the floor. What was that? Carl's voice boomed from the living room. Ethan scrambled to pick up the pieces, his hands trembling. Before he could gather them, Carl stormed into the kitchen, followed closely by Linda. Carl's face darkened the moment he saw the mess. Are you kidding me? Carl barked, his voice echoing off the walls. Do you have any idea how much that vase cost? I'm sorry, Ethan stammered, his voice barely audible. He kept his eyes on the floor, his hands clutching the larger pieces of the shattered vase. Sorry doesn't fix it, does it? Carl yelled, his anger boiling over. You're nothing but a clumsy, useless. Carl, Linda interrupted, stepping forward with her hands raised. It's just a vase. Let it go. Let it go. Carl snapped, turning to her. Do you realize the stress I'm under? And now this little brat can't even manage basic chores without screwing up. Linda hesitated, glancing at Ethan for a brief moment. It looked like she might defend him, but then her expression hardened. Ethan, you need to be more careful. We don't have time for your mistakes. Ethan opened his mouth to apologize again, but before he could speak, Carl grabbed his arm, yanking him upright. The sharp grip sent a jolt of pain up Ethan's arm, and he winced. You better shape up, boy, Carl growled, his face inches from Ethan's. Because if you mess up like this again, there will be real consequences. Do you hear me? Ethan nodded quickly, his heart pounding. Carl released him with a shove, and Ethan stumbled back, clutching his arm. Without another word, Carl turned and stormed out of the kitchen, Linda following close behind. Ethan retreated to his room, closing the door quietly behind him. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the faint red mark Carl's hand had left on his arm. His chest tightened, and the tears he'd been holding back all evening finally spilled over. He reached under his pillow and pulled out the torn photo of his biological family, the edges frayed and a small rip running through the middle. It was still the most precious thing he owned. He traced his finger over his mother's smiling face, then his father's strong, reassuring presence in the background. "Why can't I just be with you?" he whispered, his voice cracking. The tears came harder now, his body trembling with the weight of it all. As the night wore on, Ethan lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced, replaying the scene in the kitchen over and over. Just as he was beginning to drift off, faint voices from the living room caught his attention. He sat up, his heart pounding, as he quietly crept to his door, pressing his ear against it. Carl's voice was low but filled with smugness. "Yeah, it's easy money. You just play the part, keep the kid in line, and the checks keep rolling in. It's not rocket science." Ethan's blood ran cold. He could hear Linda chime in, her voice quieter. "We can't have another visit from the school. You need to make sure he keeps his mouth shut." Ethan backed away from the door, his breathing uneven. He crawled back into bed, pulling the blanket tightly around him. The words echoed in his head, louder than anything else. "No one will believe a foster kid." The next morning, Ethan arrived at school, his body heavy with exhaustion. He barely made it through his classes, his mind consumed by the events of the night before. When the lunch bell rang, he found Noah waiting for him at their usual spot in the cafeteria. "Hey," Noah said, his grin fading the moment he saw Ethan's face. "You okay?" Ethan hesitated, then shook his head. "No, I'm not." Noah's brows furrowed. "What happened?" Ethan glanced around, making sure no one else was listening. He lowered his voice. "Last night, Carl got mad. He grabbed me, yelled at me, and then I heard him talking to Linda about how they're just using me for money. They don't care about me. They just—" His voice broke, and he looked away. Noah's jaw tightened, his usual lightheartedness replaced by a fierce determination. "Ethan, you have to tell someone. Miss Roberts, the school counselor, anyone. You can't keep this to yourself." Ethan shook his head quickly. "I can't. They'll just lie their way out of it. Carl said no one would believe me." "That's bull," Noah said firmly. "Miss Roberts already knows something's up. You tell her what you just told me, and she'll do something about it." Ethan hesitated, fear and doubt warring inside him. "What if it just makes everything worse?" "It won't," Noah said, his voice steady, but staying quiet. "Will. You deserve better than this, Ethan." Ethan stared at the table, his eyes stinging. Noah's words sank in, and after a long pause, he gave a small nod. "Okay, I'll talk to her." Noah smiled, clapping him on the shoulder. "You're doing the right thing, man. I'll be here no matter what." That afternoon, Ethan walked to Miss Roberts' classroom, his heart pounding. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing. He couldn't stay silent anymore. The school hallways were nearly empty, echoing with the faint sounds of distant conversations. As Ethan walked toward Miss Roberts' classroom, his palms were sweaty, his heart pounding with each step. He clutched his backpack tightly, his thoughts racing. Doubts clouded his mind. What if she doesn't believe me? What if this makes everything worse? When he reached her door, he hesitated. Inside, Miss Roberts was sitting at her desk, sorting through a stack of papers. She looked calm, focused, completely unaware of the storm raging inside Ethan. Gathering every ounce of courage he could muster, he knocked lightly on the doorframe. Miss Roberts looked up and smiled gently. "Ethan, come in. What's on your mind?" Ethan stepped inside, his movements stiff and uncertain. He glanced around the room, as if checking to make sure they were alone, then shifted his weight from one foot to the other. I need to talk to you," he said, his voice barely audible. Miss Roberts sat down across from him, her hands twisting the strap of his backpack. For a moment, he couldn't bring himself to speak. The words were trapped in his throat, weighed down by fear. "It's okay," Miss Roberts said softly, leaning forward slightly. "You can take your time. Whatever it is, I'm here to listen." Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. "It's about Carl and Linda," he began, his voice shaky. They're not who they seem to be. At home, it's not like how they act here." Miss Roberts tilted her head, her expression encouraging but concerned. "What do you mean?" "They're different when no one's around," Ethan said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "They yell a lot. Carl, he grabbed my arm last night because I broke something, and he said if I mess up again, there'll be real consequences." He paused, his breath hitching. Miss Roberts waited patiently, letting him gather his thoughts. "They're always so nice when people are watching," Ethan continued, "but when we're at home, it's like they don't care. Carl just talks about money all the time, and last night I heard him on the phone, laughing about how easy it is to get foster care money. He said no one would believe a kid like me." Miss Roberts's face softened, her concern deepening. "Ethan, I'm so sorry you've been dealing with this," she said gently. "You don't deserve to be treated that way." Ethan hesitated, then pushed up his sleeve, revealing the faint red mark Carl had left on his arm. "This is from last night," he said quietly. Miss Roberts's expression darkened. "Does this happen often?" He nodded reluctantly. "Sometimes. Not always like this, but they're always yelling, always blaming me for stuff. And they make me feel like I'm nothing." Miss Roberts took a deep breath, trying to keep her own emotions in check. "Ethan, thank you for telling me this. I know it wasn't easy, but I'm glad you trusted me enough to share." Ethan looked down, his hands twisting the strap of his backpack again. "I don't have any proof, though," he muttered. Just what I remember and what I heard." Miss Roberts leaned forward. "Your words matter, Ethan. What you've told me is important, and I'm going to make sure this is taken seriously. You don't have to do this alone. Okay?" Ethan's shoulders sagged slightly, some of the tension easing from his body. "Okay," he whispered. The next morning, Miss Roberts went straight to the school counselor, sharing everything Ethan had told her. The counselor immediately contacted Ethan's caseworker, scheduling a home visit for later that afternoon. Miss Roberts hoped this would finally be the start of change for Ethan, but she couldn't shake the worry gnawing at her. By the time the caseworker arrived at Carl and Linda's house, the couple was ready. The living room was spotless, every surface gleaming, and Ethan sat on the couch, his face carefully blank. Carl greeted the caseworker with a warm smile, shaking her hand firmly. "Thank you for coming," Carl said, his voice dripping with sincerity. "We've been so worried about Ethan. He's been having a hard time adjusting, but we're doing our best to support him." Linda chimed in, her tone saccharine sweet. "Oh yes, Ethan's a wonderful boy, but he's been through so much. It breaks my heart to see him struggle." The caseworker asked a few questions, but Carl and Linda deflected each one with ease, painting a picture of themselves as patient, devoted foster parents. When the caseworker turned to Ethan and asked if he felt safe at home, Carl's eyes flicked toward him, a subtle but unmistakable warning. "Yes," Ethan said quietly, his hands gripping the couch cushions. The caseworker nodded, making a few notes in her file. She stayed for another 15 minutes before thanking Carl and Linda for their time and leaving. As soon as the door closed, Carl's smile vanished. He turned to Ethan, his face hard and cold. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing," Ethan said quickly. I didn't say anything. You better not have, Carl growled. You think you're smart, trying to make us look bad? You're lucky we even let you stay here. You're nothing without us. Do you understand? Ethan nodded, his chest tightening. He fled to his room, closing the door behind him. His hands shook as he sat on his bed, staring at the floor. The next day, Miss Roberts noticed Ethan's pale face and downcast eyes during lunch. She pulled him aside. "How did the visit go?" she asked gently. Ethan hesitated, then whispered, "They didn't believe me. Carl and Linda made it look like everything was fine." Miss Roberts's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "Ethan, don't let this discourage you. The truth has a way of coming out, and I'm not giving up on you. We'll figure this out together." Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and hope. He didn't know what the future held, but for now, Miss Roberts's reassurance was enough to keep him going. The atmosphere in Carl and Linda's house shifted the day after the caseworker visit. Ethan could feel it as soon as he woke up. The usual sharp commands and passive-aggressive remarks were replaced by an eerie quietness, almost as if they were waiting for something to happen. Downstairs, Carl and Linda sat at the dining table, speaking in low voices. Ethan hesitated at the top of the stairs, catching snippets of their conversation. "They're watching us now," Linda muttered, her tone tense. "We can't have another visit like that. That boy is going to ruin everything." "Let them watch," Carl said, his voice colder, more calculating. "We'll handle this like we always do. Control the narrative. I've already made a call to the lawyer. He's drafting a letter to the caseworker, framing this as a classic case of a troubled kid acting out. Emotional instability, behavioral issues, you name it. It'll discredit anything he tries to say." Ethan's heart sank. He quietly stepped back into his room, closing the door. He knew they were already spinning their web, turning him into the villain before he even had a chance to speak. Over the next few days, Carl and Linda went into full damage control mode. Carl spent hours on the phone, contacting neighbors, church members, and anyone else in the community who might vouch for them. He painted a picture of a loving couple taking in a difficult foster child, emphasizing their patience and generosity. "Ethan's been through a lot," Carl would say, his voice dripping with faux concern. "We're doing everything we can for him, but he's struggling. We just want to make sure he gets the help he needs." Linda, meanwhile, played her part perfectly in public. She became overly affectionate toward Ethan, patting his shoulder and calling him sweetheart whenever they were around other people. At school drop-offs, she smiled warmly at teachers and even brought cookies to Ethan's class, earning praise from staff and parents alike. But behind closed doors, their true colors showed. Carl's cold demeanor became even harsher, and Linda's sugary sweetness turned to icy indifference. They revoked Ethan's privileges, taking away his access to TV and limiting his meals to the bare minimum. He wasn't allowed to leave his room unless it was for school or chores. They even began monitoring his every move, checking his backpack and pockets when he came home and confiscating anything they deemed suspicious. One evening, Carl barged into Ethan's room unannounced, rummaging through his drawers and closet. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. "Making sure you're not hiding anything," Carl snapped, throwing clothes onto the floor as he searched. When he found nothing, he left with a warning. "Don't even think about trying to pull something stupid." "Well, no." Ethan sat on his bed, staring at the mess Carl had left behind. The walls of his small room felt like they were closing in, suffocating him. He clutched the torn photo of his biological family, the only thing they hadn't found yet, and wondered how much longer he could endure this. The manipulation extended beyond the house. Carl tracked down Noah's parents, showing up at their door one evening. Ethan didn't know what was said, but the next day Noah told him about the encounter during lunch. "My dad said Carl came over last night," Noah said, frowning. "He told my parents you're making stuff up and that you're a troublemaker. He said you've been lying about them and trying to cause problems." Ethan's stomach dropped. "What did your parents say?" "They don't believe him," Noah said firmly. "I told them what I've seen, and they're on your side. But, Ethan, you have to be careful. Carl's trying to isolate you. He doesn't want anyone helping you." Ethan nodded, his throat tightening. I already feel isolated, he admitted. Every time I try to fight back, they just make things worse. Noah placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. That's what they want. They're trying to scare you into silence. But you can't let them win. Miss Roberts is still fighting for you, right? Ethan nodded again, but his confidence was shaky. What if it's not enough? What if no one believes her either? They will, Noah said, his voice steady, but you have to hang in there. You're not alone in this. Despite Noah's reassurance, the psychological toll on Ethan deepened. Each day at school felt like a brief escape, but the moment he stepped back into Carl and Linda's house, the weight returned. He became quieter, more withdrawn, retreating further into himself. Miss Roberts noticed the change immediately. She pulled Ethan aside after class one day, her concern evident. Ethan, you seem different lately. Is everything okay? Ethan hesitated, then shook his head. They're watching me, he whispered. They're trying to make me look like a liar. Miss Roberts's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice calm. I know it feels that way, Ethan, but the truth has a way of coming out. You've already taken the hardest step by speaking up. Don't lose hope, okay? Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and hope. He didn't know what the future held, but Miss Roberts's reassurance was enough to keep him going. The idea started as a small spark, ignited by Miss Roberts's and Noah's unwavering support. Ethan couldn't rely on his words alone. Carl and Linda were too good at twisting the truth. If he wanted to expose them, he needed proof, real, undeniable proof. Sitting in the quiet of Miss Roberts's classroom after school one day, Ethan finally voiced his plan. I need to show people what they're really like, he said, his voice hesitant but determined. If I don't, no one will believe me. Miss Roberts leaned forward, her eyes filled with concern. That's a big step, Ethan. It's risky, but if you're careful, it could make a difference. Are you sure you're ready for this? Ethan nodded, though his stomach twisted with nerves. I have to try. The first step was figuring out how to gather the evidence. Ethan dug out his old phone, the one Carl had taken away months ago, and hid it in the bottom of his closet. It was a little outdated, but the camera still worked, and the microphone was sensitive enough to pick up sound from across the room. He decided to start small, recording Carl's outbursts when he thought no one was watching. That night, after dinner, Ethan positioned the phone on a shelf in his room, partially hidden behind a stack of books. He didn't have to wait long. As he sat on his bed pretending to do homework, Carl barged in, his face twisted with frustration. Why are the dishes still in the sink, Ethan? Carl demanded, his voice booming. I told you to clean them after dinner. I was about to do them, Ethan stammered, his hands trembling. Carl took a step closer, his voice dropping into a cold, threatening tone. Don't give me excuses, boy. You think you can just slack off and do whatever you want? Not in this house. Ethan nodded quickly, keeping his head down while the phone silently recorded every word. Over the next few days, Ethan became more confident in his efforts. He began taking photos of the bruises on his arms, carefully documenting the evidence before the marks faded. Each time, he made sure to hide the phone securely, knowing that if Carl or Linda found it, everything would fall apart. Noah was his partner in this covert operation. The two of them would meet during lunch, huddling in a quiet corner of the schoolyard to discuss their progress. How's it going? Noah asked one afternoon, his voice low. I've got a few recordings and some pictures, Ethan said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. But it's not enough. I need something bigger. Noah nodded thoughtfully. What about their finances? Didn't you say Carl talks about money all the time? Ethan frowned, the idea taking shape in his mind. He has an office at home where he keeps all his paperwork. Maybe I could look there. That could work, Noah said, but be careful. If they catch you, they won't, Ethan interrupted, more to convince himself than Noah. I'll be careful. That evening, while Linda was cooking dinner and Carl was in the living room watching TV, Ethan slipped into Carl's office. The room smelled faintly of old coffee and leather, and the desk was cluttered with papers and receipts. Ethan's heart pounded as he sifted through the mess, scanning for anything that looked important. After a few minutes, he found what he was looking for. A folder labeled Finances. He opened it and froze. Inside were bank statements and invoices detailing how Carl and Linda had been using their foster care stipends. Luxury clothing, expensive dinners, and even a recent weekend getaway. All paid for with money meant to care for Ethan. Ethan quickly pulled out his phone and began snapping photos of the documents, his hands shaking. Just as he finished, he heard footsteps approaching the office. His breath caught in his throat. Carl's voice was getting louder, the sound of his boots growing closer. Panicking, Ethan shoved the folder back into the drawer and slid under the desk, clutching his phone tightly. The door creaked open, and Carl stepped inside, muttering to himself as he grabbed a pen from the desk. He lingered for a moment, glancing around the room, before finally leaving. Ethan waited until the footsteps faded completely before crawling out from under the desk, his legs trembling as he slipped out of the office and back to his room. He couldn't believe how close he'd come to being caught. The next day at school, Ethan shared the photos with Miss Roberts. She studied them carefully, her expression grave. "This is good, Ethan. This is exactly the kind of proof we need. But it's still risky. Are you okay?" Ethan nodded, though he looked exhausted. "I'm fine, just tired." Miss Roberts gave him a small smile. "You're doing an incredible job. I'll take these to the school counselor and add them to the report." Meanwhile, Miss Roberts continued gathering evidence on her end. She interviewed Noah, who recounted the times he had witnessed Carl's aggressive behavior. She also spoke to other teachers, documenting their observations about Ethan's withdrawn demeanor and the bruises they'd noticed. Slowly but surely, a fuller picture of Carl and Linda's behavior began to take shape. Back at home, however, Carl was growing suspicious. He started checking Ethan's room more frequently, searching for anything that might incriminate him. One evening, he found Ethan's backpack lying open on the floor and rifled through it, coming up empty. Still, his paranoia grew. "You've been acting weird lately," Carl said over dinner one night, his eyes narrowing at Ethan. "If you're up to something, you'd better stop." "I'm not playing games." Ethan kept his head down, silently eating his meal. He could feel Linda's gaze on him as well, her smile faint but menacing. The constant surveillance and hostility at home took a toll on Ethan. He began to second-guess himself, wondering if all his efforts would even make a difference. But every time he felt like giving up, he thought of Noah and Miss Roberts, their unwavering belief in him keeping him going. One afternoon, as Ethan and Noah sat in the schoolyard, Noah gave him a firm pat on the shoulder. "You're doing great, man. They're scared, and that's a good thing. It means they know you're on to them." Ethan gave a small nod, though his chest felt heavy. "I just want this to be over." "It will be," Noah said confidently, "soon." Together, Ethan and Miss Roberts prepared their findings, knowing they were walking a dangerous line. The hostility from Carl and Linda was growing, but so was the strength of their case. They weren't just building evidence, they were building hope. Chunk 3 of 3, 7,500 characters. The tension in Ethan's life reached a boiling point after weeks of gathering evidence. The photos of bruises, the recordings of Carl's verbal outbursts, and the financial documents that Miss Roberts had compiled with Ethan's help painted a damning picture of Carl and Linda's neglect and manipulation. Miss Roberts had taken everything to the school counselor, who promptly escalated the matter to Ethan's caseworker. Unlike before, this time the evidence couldn't be ignored. Ethan's caseworker, accompanied by a legal representative from the Child Welfare Agency, scheduled an emergency meeting with Carl and Linda. The meeting was tense, with Carl playing the role of the victimized parent, decrying Ethan's ungratefulness and emotional instability. Linda chimed in, feigning tears and claiming they had done everything possible to help Ethan adjust. But the evidence was irrefutable. The caseworker, flipping through the financial documents and listening to excerpts of the recordings, began to piece together the true nature of the household. When pressed, Carl's facade began to crack, his answers growing defensive and angry. Linda's performance, too, faltered under scrutiny. The result of the meeting was swift and decisive. The agency decided to pursue an emergency custody hearing to determine Ethan's placement. The caseworker informed Carl and Linda that their status as foster parents was under review and that the court would decide Ethan's future. When Ethan heard the news, his emotions were mixed. Relief at the prospect of escaping Carl, and Linda clashed with the fear of facing them in court. Miss Roberts reassured him that she would be by his side, as would Noah, who promised to testify about what he had seen. With the date of the hearing set, Ethan braced himself for the next fight in his journey toward freedom. The courtroom was uncomfortably quiet as Ethan sat in a hard wooden chair near the front, his legs barely brushing the floor. He shifted nervously, tugging at the sleeves of his ill-fitting sweater. The tall ceiling, the polished benches, and the solemn faces of the judge and attorneys made the room feel impossibly large. Beside him sat Miss Roberts, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, and on the other side, Noah gave him an encouraging nod. Carl and Linda were seated across the room, impeccably dressed and oozing false sincerity. Their lawyer, a sharply dressed man with a slick demeanor, was already making his opening statement. My clients, Carl and Linda Miller, have gone above and beyond to provide a stable, loving home for Ethan, the lawyer began, gesturing toward them. Raising a foster child, especially one with a troubled past, is no easy task. Yet they've met every challenge with patience and kindness. Ethan gripped the edge of his chair, his stomach churning as Carl offered the judge a humble, almost saintly smile. Linda stabbed at her eyes with a tissue, perfectly playing the part of a heartbroken mother. The lawyer continued, unfortunately, children who have experienced trauma can sometimes act out. And in this case, Ethan has misinterpreted strict discipline as something far worse. My clients have done nothing but love and support him. Ethan's heart sank. The judge, a stern-looking woman with sharp features and kind eyes, nodded thoughtfully, her expression unreadable. Carl took the stand next, adjusting his tie and clearing his throat as if preparing for a performance. He looked straight at the judge, his voice cracking as he began to speak. Your Honor, taking Ethan into our home was the best decision we ever made, Carl said, his tone heavy with practiced emotion. He's been through so much, and we've tried to give him the stability he needs, but it hasn't been easy. He struggles with trust, and sometimes that comes out as defiance. He paused, glancing at the courtroom with watery eyes. We've sacrificed so much for him, our time, our resources, because we love him, and it hurts to think he might not feel the same. Ethan's fists clenched under the table. He wanted to scream that it was all a lie, but fear kept his voice locked inside. Carl's lawyer smiled smugly, clearly pleased with the performance. Linda took the stand next, her voice trembling as she spoke. Ethan is like a son to us, she said, her hands clutching the tissue as if it were a lifeline. We've done everything we can to make him feel at home, but it's been hard to break through his walls. All we want is what's best for him. The judge nodded again, her pen moving across a notepad. Ethan felt like the walls were closing in. They were so convincing, so polished. How could he ever make anyone believe the truth? Finally, it was Ethan's turn. His name was called, and Miss Roberts gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. You've got this, she whispered. Ethan rose slowly, his legs trembling as he walked to the stand. He climbed onto the chair, his small frame dwarfed by the imposing witness box. He glanced at the judge, then at Carl and Linda, who were staring at him with cold, expectant expressions. The judge's voice was gentle but firm. Ethan, take your time. There's no rush. Ethan nodded, but his throat felt dry and the words stuck. He glanced toward the seats where Miss Roberts and Noah sat. Miss Roberts gave him an encouraging nod, and Noah mouthed, you can do it. Taking a deep breath, Ethan began. They're lying, he said, his voice trembling but clear. They don't care about me, not really. At home, it's not like how they act here. Carl immediately leaned forward in his seat. That's not true, Mr. Miller, the judge interrupted sharply, raising a hand. You will remain silent while the witness speaks. Carl sat back, his jaw tight, but the glare he shot Ethan sent a chill down the boy's spine. They yell at me all the time, Ethan continued, his voice wavering. They say I'm worthless, and that I'm lucky to be with them. Carl grabbed my arm when he got mad. He left a mark. Ethan pushed up his sleeve to show the faint bruise. And they only care about the money they get for taking care of me. I heard Carl say it on the phone. He laughed about it. The courtroom grew quieter with each word Ethan spoke. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his old phone, which Miss Roberts had helped him prepare as evidence. His hands shook as he passed it to the bailiff. There are recordings on there, Ethan said, of them yelling. And I took pictures of the bruises and the papers I found in Carl's office. They've been spending the foster care money on themselves. The bailiff handed the phone to the judge, who listened to one of the recordings through headphones. Her expression darkened. The room was silent, except for the faint sound of Carl's voice captured in one of his tirades. When the judge finally removed the headphones, her gaze was steely. Next, Noah took the stand. He sat confidently, his sharp eyes scanning the courtroom before he began. I've seen how Carl treats Ethan, Noah said. He's rough and he talks to him like he's nothing. One time, I saw him grab Ethan's arm and drag him into the car. Ethan looked scared, but Carl acted like nothing happened. And Ethan told me how they only act nice when someone's watching. The judge nodded, making more notes. Noah glanced at Ethan and gave him a small, reassuring smile as he stepped down from the stand. Finally, Miss Roberts presented her findings. She spoke with clarity and conviction, detailing the bruises she had noticed on Ethan, his withdrawn behavior, and the financial discrepancies she had helped uncover. She handed the judge a thick report filled with her documentation, including statements from other teachers. Ethan has shown incredible courage coming forward, Miss Roberts said, but he shouldn't have had to. The evidence speaks for itself. Carl and Linda have failed to provide a safe, supportive environment for this child. The judge leaned back in her chair, her face serious as she scanned the evidence. We'll take a short recess to deliberate, she announced, standing and leaving the room. Ethan slumped back into his chair, exhaustion washing over him. Miss Roberts and Noah sat beside him, offering quiet reassurances. You did it, Noah said, his voice full of pride. You told the truth. That's what matters. Ethan nodded, though his hands still trembled. The waiting was the hardest part, but he knew he had done everything he could. Now it was up to the court to decide his fate. The courtroom fell silent as the judge returned, her expression firm and unreadable. Ethan's hands gripped the edge of the table, his heart pounding in his chest. Miss Roberts sat beside him, her presence steady and reassuring, while Noah gave him a small nod of encouragement. Across the room, Carl sat rigid, his jaw clenched, and Linda dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her face a portrait of exaggerated grief. The judge cleared her throat, and all eyes turned toward her. After reviewing the evidence, including testimony from Ethan, Noah, and Miss Roberts, as well as the financial records and audio recordings presented, the court finds overwhelming evidence of neglect and financial fraud on the part of Carl and Linda Miller. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Carl's face turned red, his carefully constructed facade crumbling in real time. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but the judge raised a hand to silence him. Mr. Miller, she continued, her voice firm, you have not only failed in your duties as a foster parent but have also exploited the foster care system for personal gain. Your actions have caused significant harm to a child who trusted you for care and safety. The court cannot and will not overlook such egregious behavior. Carl shot to his feet, his voice shaking with anger. This is ridiculous. This kid is lying. We've done nothing but care for him. Sit down, Mr. Miller, the judge commanded, her tone icy. Carl hesitated, but eventually dropped back into his chair, his fists clenched. The judge turned her attention to Linda, who was sobbing quietly, clutching Carl's arm. Mrs. Miller, your complicity in this matter is equally troubling. You enabled and participated in the neglect and financial misuse. While you may not have been the primary actor, your inaction and support of these actions make you equally responsible. Linda shook her head, her voice breaking. Please, Your Honor, I didn't mean, I was just trying to help. I didn't know it would go this far. Enough, the judge interrupted sharply. This is not a discussion. The evidence speaks for itself. She turned her gaze back to Carl. Effective immediately, Carl Miller, you are under arrest for child neglect and financial fraud. Bailiffs, please escort Mr. Miller into custody. 2 bailiffs approached Carl, who looked as though he'd been struck. He stumbled backwards, shouting, "You can't do this. I have rights." But the bailiffs grabbed his arms and cuffed him, leading him toward the exit as Linda's sobs grew louder. "Linda Miller," the judge continued, "you will remain under investigation and are barred from fostering any children indefinitely. Your level of involvement will be determined in subsequent hearings." Linda collapsed into her chair, her cries echoing in the courtroom. Ethan watched it all unfold, his emotions a tangled mess. He felt relief. Yes, Carl and Linda could no longer hurt him, but he also felt a hollow ache, a reminder that once again he was losing a place he had tried, however unsuccessfully, to call home. As Carl was escorted out in handcuffs, Linda reached out toward Ethan, tears streaming down her face. "Ethan, please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to be like this." Ethan flinched, unsure how to respond. Miss Roberts placed a hand on his shoulder and leaned in. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered. The judge brought her gavel down, regaining the courtroom's attention. "In light of these findings, Ethan will be reassigned to a new foster family. The Child Welfare Agency has been informed and will expedite the process to ensure his placement in a safe and supportive environment." Ethan exhaled shakily, relief mingling with uncertainty. He looked at Miss Roberts, who gave him a small, reassuring smile. "This isn't the end, Ethan," she said softly. "It's the beginning of something better." As the courtroom emptied, Ethan remained in his seat, his hands gripping the edge of the table. The relief of knowing Carl and Linda could no longer hurt him was undeniable, but it wasn't as comforting as he had hoped. A familiar weight sat heavy in his chest, the uncertainty of what came next. He stared down at his hands, feeling both free and adrift. Miss Roberts stayed beside him, watching him closely. "You did so well today, Ethan," she said, her voice soft but full of pride. "You were brave, and that's not easy. You should be proud of yourself." Ethan nodded but didn't look up. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice small. She hesitated for a moment. "Well," she began carefully, "normally you'd be placed with another foster family while everything gets sorted out." Ethan's shoulders sagged. "Another family," he murmured, almost to himself. He didn't need to say more. The weight of those words was clear. Miss Roberts leaned forward slightly, her tone growing quieter. "Ethan, I've been thinking about this a lot. You've been through so much more than any kid should ever have to face. And through it all, you've shown so much strength. But I don't think you should have to keep starting over." He finally looked up at her, confused but curious. "What do you mean?" She offered him a tentative smile, her words careful but sincere. "What I mean is, how would you like to live with me? You with you?" Ethan's eyes widened, his breath catching in his throat. Miss Roberts nodded, her smile softening. "I know it's a big question, and I don't expect you to answer right away. But I've been thinking about it a lot, and I'd really like to give you the kind of home you deserve. A real one." Ethan's gaze dropped to the table, his heart pounding in his chest, a mix of disbelief and hope swirling inside him. "You really mean it?" he asked quietly. "I wouldn't say it if I didn't," she said, her voice steady. "I know I can't erase what you've been through, but I can make sure you don't have to go through it again. And I'd be lucky to have you as part of my family." Ethan felt tears well up in his eyes. For so long, he had convinced himself that no one really wanted him, that he was just another burden to be shuffled around. But Miss Roberts's words felt real different. I think I'd like that," he said, his voice trembling. Miss Roberts reached out, placing a hand gently over his. "Then let's make it happen," she said softly, "one step at a time." Ethan stood hesitantly in the doorway of Miss Roberts's home, his backpack hanging loosely off his shoulder. The house was warm and inviting, with soft yellow walls and shelves filled with books and framed family photos. The scent of fresh-baked cookies filled the air. He caught sight of a girl with shoulder-length blonde hair stepping into the hallway. She looked about his age and wore a bright blue sweater that seemed to match her cheerful expression. "Hi there, you must be Ethan," she said, extending her hand confidently. "I'm Grace, Miss Roberts's daughter." Ethan stared for a moment before slowly shaking her hand. "Hi," he murmured. Grace smiled warmly. "Mom's been talking about you nonstop. Oh, and she baked cookies, chocolate chip, her specialty. You're going to love them." Before Ethan could respond, a man with sandy brown hair and a friendly demeanor appeared, drying his hands on a dish towel. "Welcome, Ethan," he said, offering his hand. "I'm James, Grace's dad. Glad to have you here." Ethan glanced at Miss Roberts, unsure of how to react. She gave him an encouraging nod. "Come on," she said gently. "Let's show you your room." The room was small but cozy, with light green walls and a soft bed covered in a patchwork quilt. A desk by the window and a small, framed photo of Ethan from school sat on the desk. He stared at it, unsure how it had made its way here. "I wanted it to feel like your space," Miss Roberts said softly, watching him. "If there's anything you'd like to add, just let me know." "It's nice," Ethan murmured, setting his backpack on the bed. Grace leaned against the doorway with an easy grin. "Let me know if you need anything. Oh, and fair warning, Dad is way too competitive at board games, but I'm the reigning champion." From the hallway, James called out, "She cheats. Don't trust her." Ethan let out a small laugh, surprising himself. "I don't know how to play board games," he admitted. "No worries," Grace said. "We'll teach you." One evening after dinner, Miss Roberts joined him on the porch. The air was crisp, and the stars shone brightly overhead. "How are you feeling, Ethan?" she asked gently. "It's different," he said after a pause, "but it's not bad." Miss Roberts smiled. "Different can be good. And remember, you're part of this family now. We're here for you, me, Grace, and James. You don't have to do this alone." Ethan nodded, his chest tightening with unfamiliar emotion. "Thanks," he said quietly. Later that night, as he lay in bed, Ethan stared out the window at the stars. His chest felt lighter, freer. Whispering softly, he said, "Maybe this is what it feels like to be safe." The house was quiet, filled with warmth and hope, and for the first time in a long time, Ethan believed that maybe, just maybe, he'd found his place. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, give this video a like. If you haven't already, subscribe for more.